many imprisonments. And it's actually his shortest letter in the New Testament, but don't let its size trick you. It's one of the most explosive things Paul ever wrote. Here's the backup story we can piece together within the letter. Philemon was a well-to-do citizen from Colossae, who likely met Paul in his missionary journey in Ephesus, and he became a follower of Jesus. Then later, when Paul's co-worker Epaphras and Philemon started a Jewish community in Colossae, Philemon became a leader of the church that met in his house. Philemon, like all household patriarchs in the Roman world, owned slaves. One of them was named Onesimus. And at some point, these two had a serious conflict, slave and master. Onesimus wronged Philemon in some way. Maybe it was theft, or maybe he cheated him. After Onesimus ran away, eventually Onesimus came to Paul in prison, likely to appeal for help. In the process, he became a follower of Jesus, and then a beloved assistant of Paul. Paul finds himself in a very difficult and delicate situation. So he writes this letter. He's going to ask Philemon not only to forgive Onesimus, but embrace him as a brother and no longer as a slave. Whoa, it's a heavy duty one. But here's how he does it. Chapters 1, verse 1 to 7. Paul opens with a prayer. First by praising Philemon. Start working around, and thanking God for the love and faithfulness he's shown to Jesus and to his people, verses 4 and 5. Then he paves the way with his request with this line. I pray that the partnership that springs from your faith may effectively lead you to recognize all the good things that work in us, leading us into the Messiah. Now the key word here is partnership, or in Greek, koinonia, which means sharing or mutual participation.
Amen.
It's when two or more people receive something together and become an agreement together. Paul's saying that faithfulness to Jesus means recognizing that all his followers are equal partners who share together in the gifts of God's love and grace. And for Paul, this experience of koinonia among Jesus' followers is not just an idea that you think about, it's something that you do in your relationship. Chapters 1, 8 to 20, which moves Paul onto his request, he finally brings up Onesimus. He says he becomes Paul's child in prison. It means that he led Onesimus to dedicate his life to Jesus. And so Paul and Onesimus are now family members in the Messiah. He's been serving Paul faithfully in prison, and even though Paul wants to keep him around, he knows that this unresolved conflict with Philemon have to be reconciled. And if they say they are followers of Jesus, it's got to be resolved.
Amen.
Which moves Paul onto his bold request that Philemon receive Onesimus back, no longer as a slave, but more than a slave, as a beloved brother in the Lord. Now this is a really, really tall order for Philemon. Under Roman law, Philemon has every legal right to have Onesimus punished or put in prison. And Paul is not only asking Philemon to forgive Onesimus, but to welcome his former slave into Colossae as a social equal, as a family member. Wow. This is way more than kindness. This is unheard of. It's freeing a slave, then treating him like a family member. It upsets the status quo of the Roman social order. Why would Philemon do such a thing? And here Paul pulls a brilliant move. He recalls the key word from the opening prayer. If you are truly a partner, koinonia, then welcome Onesimus as if he were me. And if he's wronged you or owes you anything, charge it to me and I will repay him. We see the heart of Paul's gospel message acted out. First of all, it's about reconciliation. It's just like he told the Corinthians, in the Messiah, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting sins against them, 2 Corinthians 5:19. So in this situation, Paul is putting himself in the place of Jesus. He will absorb the consequences of Onesimus' wrongdoing. He will pay the cost so Onesimus can be reconciled to Philemon. Number 2, Paul's message was more than just a legal transaction, it's also about koinonia. Onesimus, Philemon, and Paul are all equal before God. They all share the same need for forgiveness. And so the ground is leveled before the cross. It means that Philemon and Onesimus can no longer relate to each other as master and slave. They're family members now. They're brothers in the Messiah. Whereas Paul told Philemon and the whole church in Colossus, in God's new family, people are not Greek or Jewish, circumcised or uncircumcised, or foreigners or uncivilized, slave or free, because the Messiah is all and is in all people, Colossians 3, verse 11. Philemon 8, verse 20, Paul closed the letter stating his confidence that Philemon will do more than requested. Philemon 21:25, and he asked him to prepare a guest room because he wants to visit when he gets out of prison. Paul went through so much suffering, just so much. Then with this final greeting, Paul ends the letter. Paul's letter to Philemon is powerful for many reasons. It's the only letter where Paul doesn't specifically mention Jesus' death and resurrection. And this is not an oversight. He doesn't try to explain the cross with words because he demonstrates through actions. Paul is embodying here the meaning of the cross. He has made himself the clay of which Philemon and Onesimus are reconciled to God and then to each other. The letter also shows us the good news about Jesus. They're extremely personal and never private. The fact that Philemon and Onesimus are now brothers in the Messiah makes their master-slave totally irrelevant. The family of Jesus is a place where all are equal recipients of God's grace. It's a new kind of society, or a new kind of humanity, as he called it in his letter to the Colossians, where people's value and social justice is not defined by race or gender, social or economic class. In the Messiah, there are simply new humans. They're equal partners who share God together in God's healing mercy through Jesus. And that's what Paul's letter to Philemon is all about.
Yeah.